In 1902, an article was posted in the Philadelphia Times recalling the story of a so-called witch who apparently made life miserable for the people of Dover, Delaware. The witch's name was Betty Pollin, and local folklore said that she was known to ride around town on her broomstick. What's interesting about the story that I will tell you shortly is that most of the people mentioned were in fact real people who did live in and around Dover in the early 1700s. In June 1774, a local man named Benjamin Shermer had property in Dover and was known to have very nice, very large trees on his property. One day he noticed that the leaves on his biggest and nicest tree had all withered as if it was fall. The villagers, with nothing better to do apparently, all gazed at the tree in open-mouthed amazement. When the tree was examined, it was found to be dead. The leaves all fell off and there was no more sap. The villagers all agreed that this was definitely the work of a witch. Suddenly, everyone in the town was a suspect, and in a couple of days, things would get worse. Without warning, Ben Shermer's chimney fell. It was said there was no wind that particular day, and no other cause could be determined, except for witchcraft. The day after the chimney fell, Ben Shermer's nicest horse was found dead in its stall. A veterinarian came to examine it and declared the horse had died from being ridden to death. "This cannot be," cried Shermer. "That horse has not left this stall for the last 2 days. The vet replied, "Oh, naive Ben Shermer. This horse was ridden by a witch. Her marks are on the horse's flanks." Following the death of the horse, other people in the small village began to suffer from this unknown witch. It was said that one woman on her way to church on a bright sunny day was tripped and thrown to the ground by an unseen hand. And if that wasn't bad enough, a young boy was said to have been picked up and carried through the air for half a mile. The village was in a tizzy. There was definitely a witch amongst them. Rumors and accusations were spreading like crazy, and then it was decided an old woman named Betty Pollin was definitely the witch. It was said that old Betty lived in an old decrepit hut on the outskirts of town by herself. There was talk amongst the villagers that they should burn her at the stake. However, before anything unfortunate came to old Betty, she one day simply vanished from town. Had something dastardly befallen her? Years later, the story of Betty's disappearance came to light, and this is said to be what happened to her. An old Quaker named Absalom Cuff lived in the village at the time. He apparently was also suffering from the affliction of the witch. Around the time that Ben Shermer's tree and horse died and his chimney collapsed, Absalom's chickens mysteriously died, his cows stopped producing milk, and all of the beautiful flowers in his garden died. 2 weeks after the death of Shermer's horse, Absalom awoke with the feeling of someone sitting on his chest. As he opened his eyes, not seeing anyone sitting on him, the weight dissipated. He quickly realized that everything in the room appeared to be upside down. Crawling out of bed, he managed to reach the window after stumbling over the furniture, and when he looked out, he realized that the woods and fields were also upside down. Cuff quickly exclaimed, "I am bewitched!" and with much difficulty made his way downstairs, while yelling that this was definitely all because of old Betty Pollin. He sat down to think and realized that he knew how to break Betty's spell. With much difficulty, Absalom removed his rifle from the wall and loaded it with powder. He took a silver coin from his pocket and managed to cut it in two with a hatchet. Despite the difficulty with his vision, he also managed to melt down the piece of coin into a bullet for his rifle, and grabbing a piece of chalk, he walked outside. Absalom had remembered a method of witch removal that his father had taught him many years ago. He took his piece of chalk and rifle and went to the barn where he drew a figure of a woman on the door. Despite the fact that his vision was deranged and he was using a piece of chalk, Absalom was apparently a good artist, and the figure he drew looked remarkably like Betty Pollin. He backed up a few feet and fired his rifle at the chalk figure, hitting it on one of the feet. His suspicions that he was bewitched were immediately confirmed when his vision returned to normal. Absalom immediately headed to old Betty's hut and was surprised to hear groans coming from inside when he got near. He went into the hut and found her limping and hopping around, leaving a trail of blood behind her. You have guessed correctly if you guessed that she had an injured foot that corresponded with the foot he shot on his barn door. He accused her of witchcraft and threatened to go to the Dover Green immediately to gather the villagers together and have her burned. After going to the green and returning with a posse of men, Betty's hut was found empty, and she was never seen nor heard of since that day. I did some digging into the story to see if any of it was based in fact, or if it was simply folklore. While I could find no one named Betty Pollin in any of the historical records of the time, despite spelling the name in a variety of ways, and the dates the story gives when this occurred are way off, the men mentioned in the story, Benjamin Shermer and Absalom Cuff, were definitely real people who lived in Dover in the early 1700s. Benjamin Shermer was one of the founders of Duck Creek, Delaware, and the land was plotted by him prior to 1718. It just so happens that Absalom Cuff, who was a Quaker, was one of the first people to purchase a lot from Shermer. Cuff actually formed the Quaker Society of Friends in December 1705. Absalom Cuff died in Kent County, Delaware in 1721, followed by Shermer in 1737. Interestingly, I also found there was a Thomas Pollin who lived in Kent County around 1708. So while this is definitely folklore with a bit of history, I feel like there was most likely a woman who was disliked by the villagers and was the basis for this story's Betty Pollin. I'm sure she was an outsider. Maybe she was a little mean. She was probably a little bit strange, but I have to think somewhere in the history there was definitely a Betty Pollin. And that brings us to the end of the Dover Witch. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. As always, I'm Jennifer Jones. See you next time.